قلبي على جمعة الخير هلا حن قلبي على جمعة الخير هلا يا هلا ويا هلا ويا هلا ويا هلا يا هلا ويا هلا ويا
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the program. It's a Wednesday morning. Great to be with you. We're coming to you live from the ITV studios right here in Sunning Hill, Johannesburg. On the show today, we'll be talking broken relationships with Dr. Neil Butko. We'll also be looking at Amnesty International and the work they're involved in. Shanila Mohammed will be in. She is the Executive Director of Amnesty International. But first, up the road to healing of all sorts through plants, through gardening, through finding a quiet and a beautiful and a serene space in whatever healing that you're looking for, be it physical, mental, emotional, or even spiritual. We're talking with our lovely guest, our first guest on the show. She is Lucinda Mgudu. She is a chemical engineer by profession. She still practices as a chemical engineer, but weekends and after hours, you'll find her in her garden pottering around, and she'll tell us exactly why she believes that gardens and growing of plants is definitely a place of healing. Morning and welcome to the program, Lucinda.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Lovely to have you, and fascinating chemical engineer by profession.
Yes.
The world of science, pure science,
yes.
And on the other hand, you find refuge in your garden growing succulents. How
Yes.
did this start for you?
It started in 2016. I suffered from severe depression, and I spent some time in a psychiatric clinic. And when I came out, and they, gave me antidepressants. And when I came out, they told me that antidepressants are addictive, and so I need to think about that. And I was determined to wean myself off antidepressants, but at the same time healing properly. And with my depression, there was just so much clutter in my head. It was like there was a voice constantly talking, chattering. And so I wanted...
All negative chatter.
Yes, extremely negative. I was extremely suicidal. Really, the voice was just telling me, you're not good enough. You see that person looking at you, they don't like you. It was things like that.
I'm so sorry to hear that. And depression is such a huge problem in our society, and what I find very sad and irritating is that a lot of people who don't understand what depression is all about kind of almost dismiss it and tell you, the person suffering from depression, oh, come on, get
Yes.
over yourself.
Yes.
And very especially someone like yourself who is an educated person, it's almost as if people expect you to be bigger, better, and stronger.
Yes.
And people like you, because you're educated and you're in the real world of high-flying corporates, that these things shouldn't affect you at all. How come you're allowing to get at you?
Yes, to be honest, when I made a point to start talking about depression when I was at the psychiatric clinic, because there was one lady during group therapy, and she's also a professional, and she was crying and saying that she dreads going back to work because she has to hide that she's depressed, and that broke my heart. I thought, you are suffering and you need support, but you can't say it because people think you're crazy. And so I made it a point to speak about depression when I left the clinic. And yes, people do tend to say, just think happy thoughts, be positive, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that.
And also the get over yourself, think
Yes.
positive all the
Yes.
time. And I think more intensely to all of this that we're talking about is the judgment and the stigma.
Yes.
Very especially in us, in our communities, the Black communities.
Yes. No, the stigma is real, and I experienced it even when speaking about it, but I mean, I continued speaking about it. Even at work, people look at you differently. They no longer trust you with projects because, you're the crazy one on the loose. But it is what it is, it's a real issue, and we need to tackle it and understand it. And so with the clutter in my head, I just wanted silence. There was a time where I couldn't even handle phone calls. I used to put my phone on silent because even a ringtone would just get me agitated. And so I went outside. We had a lot of lawn, and we had one plant, in fact, this one. I had one succulent.
What is it called?
This is a Crassula capitella.
Okay.
So, I went outside, and I didn't know much about succulents, but it just came naturally to me that I wondered what happens if I break this plant and put it elsewhere, and it started growing.
Wow.
And I have removed, I think, almost 50% of my lawn at this point, and I've been growing succulents. So I grew the succulents for 2 years. I would come home from work at around 4 p.m. and just plant, sometimes until 1 in the morning. The security guards at this stage used to be worried about me, but I used to just plant and plant, sometimes until 1 in the morning, like I said. And I grew so many plants. And then I ran out of space in my garden, so I started growing them in pots. And I had so many pots. And I thought, what do I do with them? And I was turning 31 that year, and I thought, oh, here's a project. I'm going to make 3,100 pots and gift them to friends.
Wow.
as a birthday celebration for me. So that's how I started growing succulents. And with the plants, I just found healing.
So 2-3 years later, you're in a space of sanity, of healing, of calmness, and you want to share this with the world. Yes. Let's just backtrack back to the time where you started your journey of healing. You decided you didn't want to be addicted to antidepressants. Are you off them totally?
Yes, I took 6 months, a 6-month course, and then I'm off completely.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, when you're involved in a project like this, and I mean, you were relentless, absolutely relentless in that garden, saying things like you worked till 1 o'clock in the morning in the garden. Surely that must have caused concern for friends, family, and neighbors. Probably saying things like, there's that mad woman in the garden.
Yeah,
one can see that she has an issue, because who in their right minds would work at that time, throughout the night into the wee hours of the morning? How did you explain yourself, or did you believe that it wasn't necessary to justify your actions?
It wasn't necessary to justify my actions, and predominantly because I wasn't aware it was 1 in the morning.
Oh my word.
One of the things that I had when I was depressed, I completely lost sense of time. I wouldn't know if something happened yesterday or a week ago or a month ago. And so somebody would have to tell me. The security guards would be like, it's so late. And I'd be like, I'm enjoying this. And then I'd look at the time, it's 1 in the morning. So time would just pass and I wouldn't even notice. That's how engaging and calming it was for me.
People who suffer from depression are very fatigued. They sleep a lot. What was different in your case that you had all of this energy? And I'm sure you're not bipolar.
Yes, I have not been diagnosed as bipolar.
So you weren't in a manic phase where you had loads and loads of energy which you were putting into your garden. What was different about your situation that you had so much of energy that you were able to find refuge in gardening?
So I was constantly tired, yes. And I actually didn't sleep a lot. I used to maybe fall asleep around 3 a.m. and then wake up at 5 to go to work. So I was constantly tired, yes. And so for me, being in the garden was predominantly because I couldn't sleep. But once I was in the garden, I really didn't feel tired at all. It was like it was not necessarily an escape, because I made it a point not to escape, because people tend to, when they're ill, they say, get over it. And what I learned at therapy that was valuable is that you shouldn't get over your problems, you should get through them. So
the difference being?
The difference being, for me, getting over something, it's like, you know what, I'm just going to forget about it, I'm going to put it at the back of my mind, I'm going to shine and, move forward. But, and getting through it is, sitting quietly with yourself and admitting that, okay, we have a problem. And then slowly you basically pull it apart and try to find what went wrong, what can you do about it. And so for me, gardening was that quiet space where I quietened my mind and slowly just, I suppose, did a review of my life to figure out, when did I get ill? What triggered it? What can I do to change it? So for me, gardening really was that space where I call it therapy, really. Not that the plants were talking to me, but their silence and their calm energy and their...
Something magical about it.
Something extremely magical.
Healing,
I cannot explain it.
Totally healing.
Yes.
You said that you survived on about 3 or 4 hours sleep per day or per night, and then you had to get yourself off to work the following day as a chemical engineer.
Yes.
Were you functional? Are you still able to be functional the next morning in your day job?
You think you're functional, but not so much because you're tired and you're exhausted. And so why that struck me in the psychiatric clinic when the lady said she couldn't tell her boss that she's sick. And I thought, well, that's dreadful, because here I am tired, not fully functional. I need a manager who will understand. And so I was fortunate enough that when I told management at my former company that I was suffering from depression, they took me off certain high pressure projects. I was given more work really fitting for my mental health. I was given flexible time to leave early at work. So I was really fortunate. And I've had some friends who have suffered from depression and didn't get that at work, where the bosses just look down on you and think, I don't want you in my team, I can't trust you, and that makes you worse.
And sadly, that's very career limiting as well.
Yes.
Once you make your status known, whatever your illness is, the fear in the back of your mind is that this is career limiting. I'm not going to make any progress because I'm not going to be trusted.
Yes.
That being said, what do you believe pushed you to such a deep state of depression that you eventually institutionalized?
Denial.
And did you realize that you were getting progressively worse, that eventually you had to be hospitalized?
I didn't realize at the time, but once I was hospitalized, I mean, when I was in ICU, I had an overdose. In fact, I wasn't even aware.
You tried suicide? You tried to commit suicide?
Yes, in fact, I think I was trying to commit suicide, if that makes sense. I just wanted to fall asleep. One day I was so tired and so sad that I just wanted to fall asleep. And there were ibuprofens, and I took about 10 or 12, I don't remember. And I thought, I want to fall asleep. And then I thought, well, this is strange. I called a friend of mine who's a doctor, and I said, well, I just took 12 pills. Is that normal? And she understood what I was going through and just took me to ICU. But anyway, fast forward, where you asked, did I see myself getting progressively worse? In hindsight, I was getting progressive, but I didn't see it. And what got me to the state where I was suicidal, it's really denial, where you can feel that there's something wrong. You can feel that you're constantly tired. You can't sleep. Your eating patterns have changed, etc., which are the typical symptoms of depression. But it's really that denial. I'm really all for positive talk and, speaking things into your life, but there's a time where you actually have to sit and listen to that voice that's telling you that something is not right. And for me, I was not well, but I was covering that up with, I can do all things with Christ my Savior, and that got me ill, unfortunately.
And obviously, you don't want to admit that you are that sick that you need to be institutionalized. Yes. Did you resist that move? I'm sure well-meaning friends and family got you to the point where you needed to get into hospital to start your healing. Did you ever resist it, or was it easy because you admitted it, looked yourself squarely in the mirror and said, you are ill, you are very ill, you need help desperately?
I didn't resist it at all. In fact, when I was in ICU, I took a picture of myself, which is something I rarely do. And when I looked at the picture, I thought, how did it get to this? I mean, I looked horrible. And I thought, I need to get myself out of this as quickly as possible. And when a psychiatrist came and said, look, my admission to the clinic is voluntary because I'm not at the state where I'm a danger to society. And I thought my daughter was a year old at that time and my son was 3. And I thought my children deserve a healthy mother. And so I committed myself immediately. And in fact, it was quite the contrary. The well-meaning friends were saying, are you sure you need to go to a psychiatric clinic? Because there's that stigma that, yes, oh my God, she's lost it.
Yes.
And I used to say, I am crazy. And my friends would be like, people will think you're crazy. I said, I actually am crazy, and I'm embracing
you weren't crazy. You were just very, very depressed. And let's go for an ad break. Yes. I'm talking to Lucinda Mgudu. She's here to talk about her plants, but I couldn't resist talking about depression because we know, I think, in this day and age, every second or third person is walking around with some degree of depression because life is just too hard. People are way too judgmental. People don't give you a break. And people are really waiting to see you fall so that they can trample you into the ground. More about Lucinda, her journey to healing through succulent plants. Still to come on the show, we'll be talking broken relationships with Dr. Neil Butko, and Shanila Mohammed, the Executive Director of Amnesty International, will be joining us to talk about human rights issues. But right now we're talking depression, and we're talking about gardening, succulent gardening, and how this has changed the life of the amazing lady sitting in studio with me, Lucinda Mgudu. She is a chemical engineer by profession. She still practices her craft, but her refuge in the evenings, after hours, weekends, is the garden where you'll find her in. So you went through this journey of healing. When did you realize that you're okay now? I'm good to go. I don't need antidepressants. You probably still go for support group counseling, etc.
Yes.
But I'm okay now, and I can continue doing what I'm doing and possibly touch other people's lives in a positive way.
It took me 2 years to get to that place, which was when I actually started selling the plants that I realized I'm actually okay.
And a group of friends got together, and you also got involved with an organization, a non-profit called Clancy Foundation.
Yes.
Did this all happen at that point in time?
Yes, that's pretty much when it happened. A friend of mine, Zine Mdleleni, she works as an investment banker as well, and we're from the same location. I'm from Lusigisi, and she's from Flagstaff. And, you know, she came to me and she said, I know you've been involved in education, which I have. I have worked for certain NGOs for a couple of years. And she said, you know, the situation back home in Lusigisi and Flagstaff, children can't afford to go to tertiary school, and what can we do about it? And so we formed Clancy Foundation. And what we do, Clancy is a Xhosa word for spark. And what we do is that we go to, particularly in OR Tambo district in the Eastern Cape, and we find top performing learners. We limit it to about 10 per year, and we help them with applications to university, career guidance, paying for registration fees, and sometimes even tuition fees. We assist them with applications for bursaries, for NSFAS, etc., etc. And so we did that from 2015 while I was growing the plants. And one day, I mean, we had to raise funds.
And that truly gave you purpose as
Yes.
well. Do you believe that helped you get over the depression too?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you'll find out just now. So she then said, I mean, we were raising funds, but, you know, asking friends, etc., etc. And we're like, you know, we've run out of friends to ask for funds. And she's like, we need to start selling things. What can we sell? I can have a yard sale. And I was like, oh, there's nothing in my house, but I've got plants, which is then how Gifts That Grow started. And that just fueled my purpose. I thought, I have such a passion for education and for this NGO work. And I've got a passion for growing plants. And who knew that depression would get me to grow enough succulents to sell them to fund other people's tertiary education?
Amazing. And it's an ongoing project, obviously.
Yes.
So now we have some gorgeous plants here that you've brought in. Please tell us what they are, how long it takes to grow, and then when you do sell them off, what do you charge for them? And if any of these plants do in fact have healing properties.
All right. Okay, so I've got a variety of plants, really. They're all succulents. Succulents are native to Southern Africa, most of them from South Africa. So that resonated with me a lot. And when I started paying attention to succulents, the first thing I noticed was that you can just break a piece off and put it in the ground. It will continue growing.
Okay.
So that's how I've been growing them. So, I mean, they've all got various names. I didn't do any botany or anything like that. This has all just come intuitively. And I grew up, I'm from Ngobozana in Lusigisi. And my house has the biggest garden you've ever seen. So I grew up planting a lot. So it just came intuitively. And yes, the various plants, I mean, I've got this planter box, which is popular for a centerpiece, which we sell for 250.
And it's gorgeous.
Thank you. Oh, we love making them, really.
So who puts them together? Do you do
Yes.
it, or do you have a team of people that helps you put these things together?
It's myself and my cousin Pelela. We
Okay.
put them together, and just this year we hired one lady who assists us, Tracy.
Right. So you've created a job opportunity for someone as well.
Yes, I've got one person full-time. Okay, Pelela is my cousin, I don't pay her at all. So she's full-time but not paid. I've got one full-time employee, Tracy, and I have two people part-time. So we're growing slowly, and honestly, that is rewarding. So these are popular for weddings as wedding gifts. So typically the brides would tell me the color of the wedding decoration, and they look beautiful.
Oh, like souvenirs for people, the guests to take home.
To take home, yes. And typically you will see here, this says S&Z Misani. This was from my friend Zine and Songo's wedding.
Right.
So they will typically make something like this just to beautify it. And
you could use these as centerpieces at weddings and events as well,
yes.
apart from people taking them home.
Yes, they put these are typically used as centerpieces. Yes, and people also keep them in their kitchens, in their patios, etc., etc.
How are they? I should imagine succulents are very hardy. So, for example, if I bought one of these, how much of work goes into it? Because I'm not a green-fingered person.
That's the beauty of succulents. You don't need to be green-fingered. They just take care of themselves. So typically this plant, the care instructions that I give is that just give it 4 tablespoons of water every 2 weeks. You can just leave it. It will take care of itself. And as it
grows, won't it outgrow the pot at some point?
Eventually it will outgrow the pot, and then you can just plant it outside. And from that you can break off and grow
and
other
propagate
plants
as you go along.
And
okay, then what do we have here? Talk to us about all 3, and also tell us what they'd cost to buy and give us gifts or whatever the case may be.
All right. So all of these, the plastic pots and the enamel mug, which is popular for Heritage Day. Corporates have been buying for Heritage Day.
Right.
So these go for 30 Rand, and then this one in a glass goes for 40 Rand, 45 Rand, sorry. And about the healing properties. Different plants have different healing properties. For example, aloe vera, which I use in a very horrible tasting smoothie, but very healthy. That, for cleansing and for purifying the skin, etc. For burns, it's really good. If my children have burns, I put aloe vera on them. So different plants have different healing properties.
Now, you talk about aloe vera, and I've heard lots about it, and maybe I need to get a botanist or some alternative or natural healer to come in to talk about plants and their healing properties, specifically aloe vera. You mentioned that you take it to detox.
Yes.
When one takes any natural remedy for detoxing, can you take it on a daily basis, or do you take it weekly, or how does it actually work?
I would really recommend that each person consults a medical practitioner before they take anything. For myself, I like to take it every 2 days. If I'm really feeling like I need a detox for perhaps over a week, I'll take it every 2 days for a week. But I would really recommend that each person really consults their physician. That's not my space. I wouldn't want to give dosages, etc. But for me, surprisingly, the healing properties of the plant was not through me ingesting it. It was just with me being around the plants.
Right.
So for me, it was the calming energy, which I desperately needed, because with depression, the mind just doesn't stop working. So for me, it was the calming energy that I got from them that got me to a space where I could heal myself. So my clients, though, have started asking that with each plant, they would like a card to come with it to say these are the properties of the plant, these are the healing properties of the plant. And I will definitely be doing that in the very near future.
So you're busy with research at the moment?
Yes, I'm busy with research at the moment.
Okay.
Yes.
You've got 5 pots here. You've got the centerpiece and 4 separate little mugs and containers. Is this a sum total of what you grow, or do you have a much wider variety? You just only managed to bring in a few to the studio today?
I brought in a few to the studio. I've got over 100 different varieties of succulents.
And do you know each and every one by name, so to speak?
Yes, although I may have to go back and read the name because they're so long, but I'm learning. And for me, honestly, the priority or the focus for me wasn't to know its name and its origin. It just felt like home to me, and it was about admiring the different plant. I can tell you what happens to this particular plant. For example, if you place it in the shade, it will lose, for example, this red ring around it. It will turn into a deeper green. So for me, it was just getting lost in the plants and watching them and observing them.
How does this tie in with African traditional medicine and African traditional healing?
I know it ties somehow. I've got a friend who's a traditional healer, and she has been fascinated when she comes to my house and she points at the different plants and gives them their African names. I don't know much about that space, but I know that there is a link somehow. And like I said, for me, it was not so much ingesting the plant or administering it in any way, except for the aloe vera, of course. but it's their presence that made the difference.
You're pretty big at the moment in terms of selling off the plants. Where to from here for you, Lucinda, and for the foundation? And are you perhaps thinking of going into this business full-time and give up your profession as a chemical engineer?
That would be a dream. I have asked myself that question, but this is the answer I gave to myself, that I was fortunate to come from Ngobozana in Lusikisiki and be a chemical engineer, and I'm very much aware of that. I was fortunate that my parents were teachers and they could afford to take us to school and take us to university. And so I wouldn't want to give up chemical engineering because it's a symbol for my family.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I love this, so I've just found a way to do both. And this gets to take more students from the villages to university, and it ties it all up for me.
Wow. With 1 minute to wrap up, as far as your journey to healing from depression is concerned, can you comfortably say that you're completely healed, or do you still sometimes find yourself in a dark space and wonder, what if it grips me again? Where and how do I find my path to healing all over again, healing from depression?
All right, I do think I have healed. Although I do ask myself that question, what if I go back into depression? But at least now I know what to do. Everybody has a happy place. Everybody has that thing that they can go to for refuge. Whether it's the Bible, whether it's church, whether it's gardening, whether it's watching TV. So for me, when I get to the place where there's a clutter in my head, I know I have to go outside.
Okay, you did indicate that you're still, I presume you're still involved with a depression support group.
Yes, I do.
How important is that? How regularly did you attend? And this is very, very important. I'd love to share this with our viewers because, like I indicated earlier on, that I'm more than certain that every second, third person is walking around with some degree of depression because of the hard, the trying, the stressful age that we're living in. What do you say to people watching us this morning about support groups and going out and seeking help?
I highly recommend seeking help, professional help, as a start, because people are going through a lot. And with my talking about depression, many people have come to me and say, I present all the symptoms, but I don't want to get help because there's stigma attached to it. So I truly, truly advocate for people getting professional help. And for us, if you feel like you're not suffering from depression or any other mental health, learn about it so that you can know what to say to comfort a person who's going through it. Saying things like, just be positive, be happy, get out, snap out of it, is not helping at all.
All right, let's go for an ad break. We're going to talk a little more. I find this very fascinating, and I think it's very important that we share as much facts about the condition depression with our viewers. So we'll come back and talk a little more if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Thank you indeed. We're talking to Lucinda. She's talking about plants. She's talking about her road to healing from depression by finding an outlet and getting lost in that space. And you can hear that her story has come to that happily ever after point, and we hope it continues. Don't go away. We'll be back in a short while. Welcome back. Lucinda Mgudu is my guest. She's talking depression, her road to recovery through her gardening of succulents, which now helps fund tertiary learners in tertiary institutions. And she particularly focuses on the area that she comes from in the Eastern Cape. And why not? We need to give back into the communities that we come from. Back to you. And how important are all these role players in your life? The foundation, the gardening, you're involved in education at some point, yes. And then family and friends. Just what do they bring to the table to enable you to put even more into the upliftment of the community?
I think it all comes together. And my love for education really came from my parents who were teachers in the region, Mr. and Mrs. Mgudu. And so I grew up thinking, oh my goodness, I want to do something in education. And it didn't turn out that way. I ended up being an engineer.
How come?
Because my parents were teachers and I thought I need to be something different.
Oh, you wanted to be different.
Yes,
okay.
and so I
even though you had a deep love for education and realized the importance of educating our villages,
yes,
and in the process our nation.
Yes, and I thought to myself, I was really positive that I'm sure education will come to my life at some point. And so it did. While I was still working as a design engineer, I worked for an NGO part-time in Tusanani Foundation. So to be honest, these all come together with the family life where I learned to garden a lot. And then it's the education, which I've always been passionate about. And I did the NGO work and then ended up starting my own NGO with the Zine. And the gardening, which now funds the NGO, which funds education.
Wow.
And
all interlinked.
All interlinked.
Long-term plans for the next 5 years?
Well, we would like to see the foundation take more students into tertiary. However, we have said that when we defined ourselves, it was important for us to define what Inhlanhla Foundation was and what it was not. And we said what it was not is that it's not going to save the world. We're not going to take every student to school. And so we said our motto is one student at a time. So long term, yes, we would like to see more children being funded to go to tertiary, not necessarily by us. Our call is always really to inspire people.
Or just even if you can't afford them tertiary education, upskill the youth so that they can start up their own little businesses,
yes,
or they can be self-sufficient.
Yes, something. And that's information. People just need information sometimes. And so really I encourage, our plea is really to encourage everyone to do what they can where they can, whether it's giving somebody 5,000 Rand to start a business that they're passionate about, or whether it's paying for somebody's driving lesson so that they can get the job that they want, but to do something to better the community somehow, because we are a product of our communities. And it's really not nice when you're the only one, in that community with a house and a car and everybody else is living in poverty.
Absolutely. Are you encouraging the people that you are helping through tertiary to make certain to go back to where they come from and to give back?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have a champion, Bonga Malindi, one of our students from Lusikisiki. Every year, every December, well, from June, he does winter school for matric learners.
Wow.
And then in December, January, during that phase, he assists the students with, phoning universities and checking if they've been admitted. He will contact us and say, I've got 5 students, can you assist me with getting them into tertiary? So that's what we say to our students, that we're not asking for the money back. What we are saying is that do something like this to somebody else or a group of people. And so our students are quite involved in their communities as well.
So in your own small way, you're definitely making a difference, and a difference with huge impact. That being said, I want to wrap up this interview, but I do want to talk to you a little more about the issue around depression, because it is important. You were depressed. You were one of those very lucky ones that decided to turn things around for yourself. And look where it's got you today. You're touching so many lives in such a positive way, and we want this very strong message to go out there. So here you are with this foundation under your belt. You still practice as a chemical engineer. You still work in the garden till 2, 3 in the morning, and you're still selling these plants and funding someone's education. But it's not as simple or as simplistic as I'm putting it. There's a lot of commitment, hard work, introspection, and support group. Support work is crucial. It doesn't matter what condition you're suffering from. The support groups helps you realize the point you're at and how much more help you need. But a lot of people shirk away from support groups. Why is that, and what has it done for you?
Well, I think people don't like the idea of support groups because, in a way, it's admitting that you have a problem to yourself, and now there's a room full of people who know that you have a problem, and some people can feel exposed and just vulnerable, but sometimes you have to go to that vulnerable place to get healing, and so I advocate for them really and truly. And psychiatric clinic for me was the best place. Really, I had the time of my life. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what what to expect. And when I got there, and there were chartered accountants and geologists, and I thought, wow.
Did you, in your head, were you thinking you're going to probably be shackled and you're going to be medicated till you absolutely senseless, you're going to be like a zombie? That was what was going through in your mind.
Just people with
But what is the reality?
Running around. It's people with problems, and
like
people
you and I,
who have been brave enough to admit that they have problems and they need help. So it's this place of no judgment. Like we all know we're not there for a holiday. We all know something is horribly wrong. So just that by default, just being there, I don't have to put up a front anymore. Whereas if I'm out in the world, I don't want people to see that I'm sick. But in a psychiatric clinic, you're like, well, everyone knows I'm sick. That's why I'm here. And it was a wonderful place. There's group therapy, there's individual
and that's
therapy.
where your therapy started.
Yes, yes. So for me, that was a mental barrier really that I had to overcome. In group therapy, it's like it's a room full of people and they all have to know that I'm sick. And you know, once I spoke up, I realized it's not so bad after all. Sometimes we don't have to run away from our fears. We just have to run towards them, and then you realize there's nothing to fear. So I really, really advocate psychiatric clinics. Medical aids can take care of, most medical aids take care of 3 weeks in a psychiatric clinic, and it's really therapy every day. It's not as boring as it seems in movies where you're lying on your back
and the medical staff are caring.
Yes, and people are standing with syringes waiting to inject you the moment you go crazy. It's not like that at all. It's a comfortable place where you've got therapists, you've got occupational therapists who can even assist you in how to manage your condition with work, etc., etc. So for me, that was from
Did you have that support as well? Did you need to see an occupational therapist?
They really come as a package in the psychiatric clinic.
And what was the assistance that you needed as far as the OT was concerned?
More so at work, where they said, is your management aware of your condition? Do you think it's safe to speak? Because they'll continue putting pressure on you. I had lost sense of time, you see, so giving me a deadline, like I wouldn't really know what was going on. So just really helping you managing it in the work environment. Sometimes they'll say, look, assess your situation at work. Maybe it's not a good idea to speak up about your depression at work, because if you will be victimized, and that has happened to some of my friends, then you have to find another way to manage it. So that was really, really important.
More importantly, what were you saying to immediate family and friends? Because, you expect them to hold you close to their hearts. They are your very foundation of survival. But sometimes they can end up being most judgmental and very, very cruel.
I did lose a lot of friends, which I didn't notice at the time because I was too busy gardening. But after 2 years, I thought, actually, what happened to so-and-so? And it really makes some people uncomfortable. Some people will say you're possessed, you've got demons. I had a lot of people saying, come to my church, we're going to pray for the demons that you have. And
how did you feel about that, and how did you respond to that? Because very especially with mental illnesses, when you can't kind of get on top of it, and if the healing process is pretty long, immediately people jump to the conclusion that you're possessed, and they want to get holy men or holy people to help heal you. And as it is, you're not in a good space, you're very, very vulnerable, and then you get this kind of stuff being fed to you. You're an educated person, I have no doubt in my mind, you dealt with it very rationally, I hope, but not everybody's in that space. What's your advice?
Well, I think it's important for the person who's suffering to realize that anybody who gives you advice is doing it out of love. I don't think anyone will come and say you've got demons because they just want you to get worse. In their assessment, with their knowledge, they think they've diagnosed you, and they're genuinely trying to get you help by getting holy water or holy oil or whatever it is that people use. So I took it in that way that, this person is concerned and they really want to get help for me.
And the holy water ain't gonna hurt.
Well, I didn't try it, that's for sure. But I just thought we all work with the knowledge that we know. And from where I sit, I know that it's not demons. I know that it's a medical condition that requires medical treatment. And so politely I say, thank you for the advice. I'll call you when I'm ready to take up your offer. And I just really never call. So that's how I took it. It didn't offend me in any way, really. It just showed me that we need to educate people on mental health. And my Facebook friends are probably bored to death with my mental health statuses, but I make it a point that at least maybe once a week, or maybe even once every 2 weeks, I post something, whether it's on bipolar, on depression, etc., just to say these are the symptoms, this is what you should look out for. And surprisingly, each time I post that, somebody will send me a message, whether it's WhatsApp or inbox, to say, hang on, I know somebody like this, or I think I'm suffering from this. So I think it's knowledge, or lack thereof.
You now attend support groups once a month.
Yes.
Are you ever going to stop? Do you feel that you're going to reach a point where you're not going to need support groups any longer? Or do you go there with the intention of trying to help someone see the light, so to speak, and to support other people?
Yes, okay. Well, I still go. And I go there, and it's really not depressing. You know, people would think that if you're talking about depression, then everybody gets depressed. For me, no, it's actually healing. And really, I admire anyone who goes to support groups to get help, because that's bravery. And I go there really to get healing myself, and to hear other people's stories and other people's journeys, and to also hopefully be a glitter of hope, or a glimmer of hope rather, to somebody that, you know, you can get through it, not over it, you can get through it. And ongoing, you asked, long-term, would I want to continue? Long-term, I would like not to need, how do I put this? I wouldn't want to go to a support group to speak about depression. I would like to have that conversation as a normal conversation with friends. We're never afraid to say my back hurts or my ankle hurts, but when it's something with the head where you're saying, I've got mild depression, then it's an uncomfortable conversation. So I would like to see support groups shifting from psychiatric clinics to our living rooms.
Absolutely. You're healed. I'd like to think completely healed. But in the back of your mind, do you ever kind of wonder, is this going to rear its head again? Will at some point in the future, I start feeling depressed again? Will I get back into that dark hole? Because if you suffer from depression, it's really about a chemical imbalance in your brain. And through the healing, through the meds, support, etc., that imbalance has been fixed. But maybe some stage in the future, whatever the trigger might be, it might be stress, it might be another illness, it might be whatever, and it might present again.
Right.
One can never be prepared for any of these eventualities. I mean, illness is an illness. Life happens. But do you ever ponder about how you'll handle it maybe differently, or with more knowledge? You'll be in a position of power, perhaps, because of what you've been through?
Right. No, that really does come to mind. And a number of times I've noticed that if I get too excited, I start feeling anxiety attacks. And so there's definitely a possibility that one could go back to that place. But what I have done for myself, in fact, I think with depression, it's a holistic approach, really. It's the medication and the therapy and various other things, food being one of the things that you
Talking about food, you've just preempted my next question, diet. What sort of diet do you follow? And people suffering from depression, what type of food should they avoid?
Okay, so the first question, what sort of diet do I follow? I am now mostly vegetarian.
Wow.
It's been about 3 years now.
Why?
Do eat meat from time to time. I really don't know why. And
it has nothing to do with the depression.
It happened at the time of the depression. I don't know if my body was intuitively guiding me towards a solution. I'm by no means saying that meat causes depression or not eating meat heals depression. But when I came out of the psychiatric clinic, I just stopped buying meat, and it's been 3 years. And I started growing my own vegetables. So it's a plant-based diet, mostly meat from time to time, but I try to make it organic. And that has completely changed me. Energy levels just went up. So
you're probably going to say no to too much sugar as well.
yes, I have stopped buying sugar. I've started substituting it with honey. And to be honest, I wasn't following any regimen that I saw somewhere. It just really just came naturally. I just didn't.
Just following your own instincts.
Yes, I was following my own instincts, and I wouldn't want to answer what diet people with depression should take. I would say maybe consult your healthcare provider. That's not my space, and I wouldn't want to give recommendations of that nature. But what I can say is that I think there's a definite link between diet and illness or health altogether.
Absolutely. I think that's a no-brainer. To wrap up then, let me just backtrack again and ask you about how do you deal with those thoughts of what if the depression sets in again next week, next month, next year? How do you deal with those thoughts? Because if you don't deal with them in a healthy way, you're going to be depressed.
Yes. So the commitment that I made, introspecting with my previous condition, well, the build-up to my hospitalization, was that I had a problem. I knew I had a problem, but I wasn't speaking to anyone about it. And so now I've made a commitment with a few of my friends, one of them being a psychiatrist, Nogwaz, to say that if I feel those thoughts, I will immediately call Nogwazi and say, I'm feeling suicidal. And she's a psychiatrist and she's aware of my condition and she'll know what to say. Because I think when you're in that situation, it's very easy for you not to see that you are backtracking. So I would say to people, just be honest with yourself and with your feelings. And if you're not feeling okay, say so.
Absolutely. Take-home message for all our viewers today. What would it be? Especially people who are suffering from maybe mild depression.
Right. I would say you know yourself better than anyone. You are by yourself at night. You know your thoughts. And if you feel that your thoughts, if you know that your thoughts are toxic, your thoughts make you cry, then you probably have a problem. And that maybe don't go to a healthcare provider. You can Google is not a doctor, to see if you're presenting certain symptoms. And if you think it's serious, get help. Even if it's just one consultation with your GP, just to say that this is because we tend to wait for things to go too far and it doesn't need to. If your sleeping patterns change, if your appetite changes, if you're constantly tired and suicidal, talk to someone.
And lonely and feeling alone and feeling tearful would be some of the signs to look out for.
Yes, and for me a big one was thinking everybody was out to get you. There was a point in my life where I thought everyone was just out to get me. You would say something like, oh, you've got a stain on your shirt. I'd think, I knew she was out to get me. So if you think that people are after you, if you're paranoid, you may not think you're paranoid, but if you think everybody's out to get you, there's probably a problem. And speak to someone. Don't let it go too far. Yes, don't let it go too far. That's what I would say.
Well, thank you indeed for coming in and sharing a very personal story with us, and the fact that these gorgeous plants, these succulents, has been your road to healing. Please remain healed. Please touch other people's lives in a very healing fashion. Thank you indeed, and God bless, that's all I can say.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
That was Lucinda Mgudu talking about her illness, depression, which thankfully she overcame just through her gardening. So if you're in a dark place, maybe you're not depressed, maybe you're suffering from another form of illness, perhaps what you need to do is find something that interests you, find something that gives you joy, find something that gives you meaning, even if it's walking, running, sport, baking, cooking, whatever it is, it's going to give you purpose and hopefully give you grounding, give you meaning, and then you'll start. I'm not saying that's going to heal you, but you're going to start on your road to recovery. We're going for an ad break. When we get back, we'll hopefully be joined by Dr. Neil Butko. I've just been told, unfortunately, Shanila Mohammed from Amnesty International is not able to join us this morning. She's had an emergency in her life. We do hope and pray it's nothing too serious, but she will join us another time. Stand by. Welcome back. We now have Dr. Neil Butko in studio together with his gorgeous dog called Tuppence. Tuppence is his guide dog because Dr. Neil Butko has a problem with his sight. and he's a regular guest in studio. He lectures in pharmacology at Wits University and has also been involved with Lifeline as a counsellor for the past 20 years, including being on the board of Lifeline. So always a pleasure to talk to Dr. Neil Butko. Morning, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Julie. It's always great to be here with you.
Always wonderful to pick your brain. And on the show this morning, with about 24 minutes to go, I want to talk about broken relationships and the road to healing.
Yeah.
And you'd be the best person to talk about it with your years and years and years of counselling at Lifeline.
Okay.
And I know the question I'm going to put to you is, you're probably going to respond and ask, how long is a piece of string? But when we talk broken relationships, there's a whole host of reasons why relations, number one, start up and then inevitably fail. Let's look at those reasons. Let's look at when you meet someone, you look at them through rose-tinted glasses and you have expectations on how the relationship is going to move forward, but somewhere along the line you hit a bump in the road. It may be a small bump, but that bump could unravel years or months or even weeks of what might have been an amazing relationship.
I think there's always conflict in relationships. And
doesn't matter how much you love the person.
Exactly. I mean, there'll always be, I think you're looking at two people who have their own world views and their own way of seeing the world in whatever way that they see it. And in psychological terms, that is sometimes called the confirmatory bias. So what happens is that we look at the world first in a certain way, and then we start gathering the evidence to support that view. And that then will obviously come up against our partner's view, which will be maybe something completely different. And then the idea is, I've got to make this person conform to the way that I think and feel and need them to be. In order for me to feel okay, that's what I need from them. And in relationships, you know, we actually have very little power over the other person. The only power that we really have is to change the way that we see the world or the way that we interact. But most people are not interested in that. All they want to do is they want to have their own way of behaving and acting and being in a relationship. And that's what causes the breakdown. And when those two different ways of being are entrenched and both of the parties are defending that way of being, you're going to get conflict and you almost inevitably going to get breakdown of a relationship.
Now, what about people? There are different reasons for people getting into a relationship.
Yeah.
Some people hate the thought of being alone or lonely or think that they're lonely.
Yeah.
And that doesn't necessarily guarantee that if you're going to a relationship, that feeling of loneliness or that feeling
Absolutely,
of emptiness is going to go away. If you have a hole in your soul, no one else can fix it for you.
But that's the real problem, Julie, is that people are looking to somebody else to make them feel complete and whole. I think that the fear of loneliness and the fear of not connecting with somebody is so huge that people would rather choose a bad relationship than no relationship. That is always an option that they would prefer. I'd rather be in a bad relationship, getting bad feedback, bad strokes, being uncomfortable, having anxiety, all of that type of thing, rather than being alone. Because being alone, you really have to start being in touch with yourself and what really, you know, all those demons that can actually appear when you're alone.
I think the other factor here as well is the issue around society. Because if you're alone or if you're not in a supposedly meaningful relationship, you're being judged. You're not good enough. And you start believing that you're not good enough. So you'd rather be stuck in a bad relationship than be viewed as not being good enough or being a broken person. Let's talk more about that.
Well, I think society prizes relationships because that's the one way that we can make sure that there's a generation continuing from the last. And you can only really do that in relationship with someone. So we've, as human beings, I mean, we have exactly the same needs as animals, bacteria, viruses. We need shelter, we need food, we need a mate, and we need to pass on our genes, which is exactly the same struggle that every single living organism on this planet is actually also engaged in. So, you know, with that in mind, you know, we will make choices in order to try and satisfy those 4 criteria. And so will animals. And, you know, what we see is that playing out. But obviously what is happening in humans is that our forebrain, our neocortex, this part of our brain here, which is the newest part of the brain, gives us a lot of control, gives us a lot of insight, gives us a way of rationalizing, of cognitively understanding stuff. But it also makes us deeply complex beings that are not easy to predict where we're going to go with our relationships and our behavior in relationships.
You often get people in a volatile relationship.
Yes.
You often hear people saying it's both the parties involved in the relationship have similar personalities, and that is why they're in conflict all the time. Is there any truth to that? You know, do you have to be totally different personalities for the relationship to work? And, you know, what is that all about?
Yeah, I don't think you need to have people that are similar personalities, but what they have found, and I mean this is based on, you know, research that has been done and reinforced all the time, is that if you have similar, like sort of feelings and thoughts about certain things, like if you like the wild outdoors, you know, there's no point getting involved with somebody who likes
a bookworm, for example.
Exactly. So some of those basic sort of concepts need to be satisfied. You know, that this person shares some of the ideals and the way that I see the world and my pastimes, and you know the way that relationships are actually structured, and then you can use that as a basis for a relationship, and then you know you're not going to have conflict about, you know, whether you want to read and whether I want to go on a hike or whatever, something like that. So that just makes it a little bit easier, and I suppose also that's where religion and faith and all of that comes in also, because we feel much more familiar with those type of people, and we're not going to end up in conflict with them around things around religion and belief and faith and whatever.
And yet, prior to the actual solemnizing of that relationship, be it through marriage or whatever, if you do come from different cultures or different faiths, etc., because you're in the honeymoon phase, you prepare to overlook all of that, and then reality hits, and isn't it about perhaps control? So prior to the marriage or prior to this partnership, you're prepared to overlook everything that was negative that you've picked up about your partner, because in your mind you're saying, I'm going to fix him or I'm going to fix her once we're married. A lot of people go into a relationship with that thought in the back of their minds, don't they?
I would think that, you know, maintaining a certain image and control is very important. There's a theory called imago theory, and in that, what they actually say is that on a deeply psychological level, what we're doing is we actually picking partners that are in a way trying to resolve some of our primary relationship problems. And that means what we're doing is that we're picking a partner in order to try and resolve some of the relationships that we have mainly with our parents or our caregivers. And what then plays out is that during the, like you say, the honeymoon phase, you don't see any of the problems. Suddenly, when you get past that stage, you start projecting all of your stuff onto them, and they start looking more and more like either your caregivers or your parents. And that's when it becomes really, really, a struggle and painful and whatever. Then in imago therapy, what they say is that the way to healing is to understand that relationship and to try and get the person to understand that their partner is not their parent, and that what you need to resolve with your parent is a separate issue, and that don't project all that stuff onto your partner. It's not your partner's ability to actually try and work with that.
What about the rescuer? So
Yeah.
you get into a relationship and you find that the person was possibly abused as a child.
Yes.
And you now want to be his or her great savior, or things went so horribly wrong in your partner's life that you believe
Sure.
you are this great rescuer, you're going to come along and you're going to live happily ever after with each other.
Because if I rescue you, you're going to feel indebted to me for the rest of my life. If I make it okay for you, if I'm the person that makes you feel whatever and it brings you completeness or whatever, there's a swap of things going on there. So I give you that, you give me love, and you promise never to leave me. That's what I'm really hoping for at the end of the day. If I'm the rescuer and I'm working so hard to keep you complete, I'm hoping that the transaction is you will never leave me. And that's what people are doing all the time. They're trading certain things between themselves.
Unspoken stuff that's going on, this unspoken barter or trade going on between the two people.
There's a book called What Do You Say After You Say Hello? And
yeah.
And what it is a book about how people transact. And in this type of model, what we've got is we've got three what we call ego states. Parent right at the top, and we know that parents can be critical, but they can also be nurturing.
Mm-hmm.
An adult right in the middle, and the adult is part of that cognitive part of our brain that makes decisions, is rational, intelligent, executive, uses all the information. And then right at the bottom is the child ego state. And when we're in relationship, what we actually are doing is we're not connecting adult to adult, okay? Mm-hmm. Because that would be the best way of connecting. Hello, how are you? Yes, I'm fine. Let's do this.
Respectful, meaningful, intelligent.
All of what we are little children, needy little children, and we know that children are impulsive. They can do whatever they want. They get into bad moods. They get into tantrums. They get into all of that type of stuff. But what we're doing often in relationships is we're connecting with that other child because we want to play with them in some ways. We want to feel connected, and the way that we feel connected is by playing, And if
that person panders to your needs, you're going to be stuck in that relationship.
Then I've got this transaction that's happening between these two child ego states. And when it comes to the crunch, and when it comes to making major decisions about, let's say, the house or the kids or something like that, suddenly you've got two children that are entrenched and that are rebellious against each other.
And that's when the trouble starts.
And that's when the trouble
Let's go
starts.
for an ad break. We'll be coming back and talking more about this fascinating subject, relationships, conflict in relationships. I don't think you can ever resolve conflict. You can work around it, you can dance around it, but I'm not quite sure if you can have total resolution, but we'll talk some more. Dr. Neil Butko is my guest. We're talking relationships, how to heal from them, how to navigate around them, and hopefully make some sense of your own relationships. We'll be back in a minute or two. Welcome back. We're into the final segment of the interview this morning. I'm talking to Dr. Neil Butko. The discussion was meant to be focusing on broken relationships and the road to healing, but we're really talking about relationships and the different personality types involved and the games that are being played out in a relationship. Yeah. So back to you, Neil, and the response to the previous question. We were talking about the childlike stage. We were talking about the parent stage, and we're talking about the adult. Do people ever get to the adult stage? Do they remain there? Do you have relationships that are that healthy and remain in that healthy state?
Look, it is possible. It should be possible because, if you've got two people that are aware of their own triggers, they're aware of the things that actually motivate them, that can derail them, all their little problems that they have, their luggage, their baggage, whatever you want to call it. And you have those two people that have also individual capacity to work on themselves and also on the relationship. I think it is possible, but I think that there's a lot of biological imperatives which are actually very powerful that we don't quite understand from our partner. And you were talking earlier about the rescuer. I mean, the rescuer is, just somebody who's trying to get their needs met.
By rescuing other people.
Absolutely. So I'm going to trade you a rescue. You're going to give me some love in return, and you're going to promise never to leave me, okay? Because you need me. I rescued you, okay? You're going to have to be indebted to me
for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
so the rescuer is also very, very needy. They need something from the relationship or the greater world out there. So they keep rescuing broken people along the way, knowing that those broken people are going to be in their debt for the rest of their lives.
Yeah,
there's that obligation.
They will be in their sphere, but the problem is that once you've fixed that broken wing and now your little bird wants to fly away, you've got to go and hunt it down virtually. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why people get quite obsessed in relationships, because it's the loss of the contact. Suddenly this person doesn't need me anymore. They're not giving me the love that they once promised. I can't believe that. I'm going to go after them. They must need me. They must need me more and more and more, and I will make sure that they do. Rather than seeing, okay, this is a relationship that has just ended. Let's look at why it's ended, and go through all the different stages, the anger, the grief, the pain.
Is that normal? Let's look at a very conflicted relationship where really bad things probably played out.
Yeah.
It eventually ends for whatever reason, but there's a lot of guilt, remorse, sense of loss, grieving, etc. Why should there be all of those negative feelings of sadness and loss, even though it was such a relationship that was so riddled with problems?
Yeah, because, we all enter relationships with a hope and with a feeling that this is going to work, this is going to make us feel whole. We, somewhere deep inside of us, in our sort of psyche, we don't feel complete until we're in a relationship with someone or something. And you can also be, as a holy man or a cleric or a monk or something like, you can be in relationship with a spiritual higher being also. That's also another way of being in relationship. But in human relationships, we've got a partner that we can't completely control. And, when it does break up, when it does actually falter, we are going to have feelings of shame and guilt and misery, and we also have ways of actually dealing with all of those type of relationships. I mean, we can use alcohol and drugs, we can use denial, we can get into other relationships, we can get into a very cognitive way of thinking, of rationalizing, this is the way that the universe works, and this is, I don't have to unload my baggage. But we know that when people go through what we call the wheel of growth around a relationship, it gives you more insight, gives you more ability to actually start trying to form better relationships next time.
I want to come back to the Wheel of Hope, but I do also want to ask, when you look at a breakdown of a relationship as opposed to losing a partner through death,
Yes.
Is the grieving process similar, the same,
Very
or is
similar.
there more anger in the one as opposed to the other?
I'm not sure that there's quantifiable more anger, but you made a very good point, and that when a relationship comes to an end, it's like a death. It is like a death, because suddenly this person, not suddenly, but for a long time, this person is not available to you anymore. So in a way, they are, cognitively, they're dead to you. And you have to then cope with all the feelings of, should I, didn't I, remorse, sadness, badness, madness, all of that type of thing, the guilt, the shame, the sense of failure, the loss of esteem, all of that type of stuff. So in a way, it is like a critical death that has happened to you.
When you're in such a dark place, a relationship has just ended, you're going through all of these very negative feelings. Yeah. And people are different, people's needs are different. But how do they start healing? And you don't want them to heal too quickly. A lot of people think, especially men, with due respect to you, Neil, but especially men, the moment a relationship ends, they try and get into another relationship immediately thereafter. And I'm wondering, how healthy is that? Are they not going to another relationship on the rebound? And how much of all of that baggage is not going to impact on the new relationship?
It undoubtedly will impact on the new relationship. I think there are stats that show that, only 1 out of every 2 marriage will actually survive. The rest will be in divorce. But the stats for second marriages are even worse. It's over 80% divorce rate.
And that is because one of the parties is bringing a whole lot more baggage into the relationship.
And we don't understand, what we're bringing, and all our hopes and ideals, and all our failures, and our sense of guilt and shame, and all of those type of things.
I should imagine comparisons play a big role there as well.
I'm sure they do, and it's just indicative of the fact. Now, also biologically, what you must take into account, and I know that people don't like hearing this, but as a species, humans are not actually monogamous. I know people, but the reason for that is why we say that is that when we go back about 12,000 years to when we first were hunter-gatherers, we lived in very different type of societies. We lived in a society dominated by a strong male or 1 or 2 strong males, and essentially like a harem of women around him, almost like impalas and springboks are nowadays. And that male then had the need to actually try and make sure that competitors didn't get into his harem. So there was quite a lot of conflict around those type of things. But what's happened is that a lot of our the way that we think about sexually has then come from that type. And if you think about 12,000 years on an evolutionary scale, is not actually a lot. So there hasn't been a big change in how evolutionary we see each other. What society has done is then said, what we value the most is the nuclear family, mother, father, children. And we will then use the marriage and the interaction between the two to keep that nuclear family safe and potent in this world. But biologically, we may not be that way, and especially men. Men certainly may not be monogamous. I mean, there's lots of
and that's one
theory.
One of the biggest problems in a lot of relationships these days, the issue around monogamy.
Absolutely.
But that being said, what about this relationship? Let's get back to the parent, the adult, and the child.
Yes.
And the issue around, very especially when the 2 children are in the relationship, and when there's a lot of finger pointing and blaming. He pushes my buttons all the time. He knows exactly which buttons to push. How do we navigate around this situation? What is it that we do and justify, I did this because it's your fault. It's your fault because you made me angry. It's your fault because you confronted me. It's your fault because you came into my space, etc., etc., etc. But I was involved in the actual action, but it's your fault that I was involved in that reaction or...
Because we don't want to take responsibility. It's too painful to take responsibility, because then we might have to see all of our baggage and all of our buttons that are being pushed. And we then have to actually take responsibility. And that's what, when I was talking about the wheel of growth, that's about it. Because taking all the painful feelings that you get from the breakup of a relationship, you know, and it was your fault. And so one way that we can actually try and navigate that is through couples counseling. Because what that does is that it makes a lot of the issues visible. It brings them out into the open. And then what we can do is we can start saying, okay, so I want this. Can you give this to me? If not, this is what I will do.
Compromise.
That's all about an interaction on an adult-to-adult level. That's not a child-to-child level.
And it's okay to have a counselor to help you through this interaction, because if not, we'll probably get back to the childlike state. We've got a minute to wrap up very quickly in terms of relationships. When a breakdown happens, how crucial is it to go for therapy?
Find help. Find help. There are very good organizations like Lifeline and Family Life Center, you know, that can help you in that thing. And maybe it won't be a happy ending. Maybe you won't be, you know, in a marriage. Maybe you'll be in a divorce, but you'll have more understanding about your role in the relationship.
And not blame the whole world around you for the breakdown and just the way it ended. Thank you indeed for being with us. We'll have to get you in again to talk about healing and a whole host more.
Sure.
And I wish you a speedy recovery.
I
know that
Julie.
this flu has plagued you for the past month. I do hope that you can rid yourself of it eventually. Thank you once again. And to you too, Tuppence, thank you for coming in all the time. And that's where we leave it. Thank you indeed for being with us on the show this morning. I sincerely hope you've enjoyed our company. Till Saturday morning at the same time as always, please take care on the roads. A big thank you to the production team. And as always, it is Khudafez from me, Julie Alli.
قلبي على جمعة الخير هلا، حني قلبي على جمعة الخير هلا، يا هلا ويا هلا.